The galaxy liked clear rules. Strong civilizations led, useful ones followed, weak ones faded quietly, preferably without slowing anyone else down. Humans had learned this during their first year among the stars. They were new, clumsy, and painfully honest. Their ships were practical rather than elegant. Their technology worked, but it was not beautiful. And yet, they had been invited to the Great Convergence, a once-in-a-century gathering where emerging species were allowed to choose a single alliance that would shape their future. Most species waited centuries for such an invitation. Humanity received one in less than 40 years. No one could quite agree why. Some said it was curiosity. Others said it was a test. A few whispered that the older powers wanted to watch humans fail publicly, as a warning to others who rose too quickly. Whatever the reason, the humans came. They arrived with nervous diplomats, translators that still made mistakes, and a small delegation led by Ambassador Elias Monroe. He was not impressive by galactic standards. He had gray in his hair, lines around his eyes, and a habit of listening longer than was polite. He stood now in the center of the Convergence Hall, a space so vast that even sound seemed to hesitate inside it. Around him floated representatives of dozens of civilizations, some physical, some projected, some existing as light or sound or patterns that humans could barely understand. At the far edge of the hall, almost hidden behind larger and brighter presences, was Princess Illyra. Most did not look at her. She sat in a gravity-supported chair designed for her fragile body, her limbs thin and partially unresponsive. Her species, the Valari, were once known for their artistry and advanced thought-weaving technologies. But centuries of genetic instability had left many of their noble line physically weakened. Illyra was born into royalty, but her body had never followed the proud lines of her ancestors. She could not stand without support. Her voice required assistance to project beyond a soft range. Her movements were slow and deliberate, often misunderstood as hesitation or fear. To the galaxy, she was a symbol of decline. To herself, she was tired. Tired of being introduced with apologies. Tired of watching envoys smile politely and then drift away. Tired of knowing that the alliance proposals offered to her people were always conditional, temporary, exploitative, and never meant to last. She had not expected humanity to choose her. No one had. The Convergence moved quickly at first. Powerful empires made their offers obvious. They promised protection, trade routes, advanced knowledge. Some barely disguised their intent to absorb humanity entirely within a generation. The humans listened. They asked questions that made others uncomfortable. How would smaller members be treated? What happened if priorities changed? What if a species could not contribute in conventional ways? Some delegates laughed softly. Others looked away. Ambassador Monroe took notes. When the time came for humanity to announce its choice, the hall grew quiet. Not because the humans were important, but because unpredictability always made older powers uneasy.
Monroe stepped forward.
His voice was steady, though his heart was not. "Humanity has considered all offers presented," he said. "We thank every civilization that spoke with us openly." He paused, glancing briefly toward his delegation. They nodded. Some looked terrified. Some looked resolved. "Our decision," Monroe continued, "is not based solely on power, territory, or projected advantage." A ripple of irritation moved through the hall. "We choose," he said, "to form a lasting alliance with the Valari people." Actual silence. Several seconds passed before the meaning settled. Eyes, human and otherwise, turned slowly toward Iria. She felt the attention like a physical weight. Her breathing quickened. For a terrible moment, she was certain this was some kind of mistake. Then she saw Monroe look directly at her. Not through her, not past her. "At her. We specifically recognize Princess Illyra as our primary liaison and representative," Monroe added. The reaction was immediate. Whispers flared into open commentary. Diplomatic lights flickered. A representative from a dominant trade empire let out a sound that translated roughly to disbelief. "This is irrational," one voice echoed. "The Valari are unstable. They offer no military advantage. Their princess cannot even—" Monroe raised one hand, not aggressively, just firmly. "We are aware," he said. "We still choose them." Illyra's hands trembled against the armrests of her chair. Her aide leaned close, whispering reassurance, but she barely heard it. No one had ever chosen her like this. Not without conditions. Not without quiet calculations that always ended with disappointment. The Convergence attempted to intervene. Procedures were cited. Warnings issued. Humanity was informed, politely but clearly, that this choice could not be reversed. Resources would be limited. Future offers would be restricted. Monroe listened. "We understand," he said. "You will regret this," another delegate said. "Possibly," Monroe replied, "but regret is familiar to us. Abandonment is worse." That phrase spread later, quoted, analyzed, and debated. At the time, it simply hung in the air. The alliance was sealed. When the session ended, representatives dispersed quickly. Some avoided looking at the humans. Others stared openly, as if trying to see the flaw that explained such a decision. Illyra remained where she was, stunned. She expected the humans to leave without speaking to her. That would have been understandable. The announcement itself was already more than she had ever received, but Monroe approached her slowly, careful not to startle her or invade her space. "Princess Illyra," he said gently, using her title without irony. "If you're willing, we would like to speak with you privately." She studied him. Humans were strange-looking up close. Soft faces, expressive eyes. Fragile in their own way. "Yes," she said, after a moment. Her voice was quiet, but the translator carried it clearly. "I would like that." They met in a smaller chamber designed for neutral species. Monroe sat, rather than standing, bringing himself closer to her level. Other humans entered only after asking permission. No one rushed, no one spoke over her. That alone felt unreal. "I need to ask," Illyra said carefully. "Why?" Monroe did not answer immediately. He folded his hands, choosing his words with care. "Because when we reviewed the data," he said, "we didn't see a weak civilization. We saw one that had been surviving quietly for a very long time."
She blinked.
"We saw people who kept knowledge alive even when it brought them no advantage," he continued. "And a princess who was never given the chance to lead because leadership was confused with physical strength." Illyra looked away, emotions tightening in her chest. "You gain little from us," she said. "Others have already told you that." Monroe nodded. "That's true. In the short term? And in the long term?" He smiled faintly. "We don't know, but humans have learned something important about the future." "What is that?" she asked.
"You can't predict it well enough to only invest in power," he said. "You have to invest in people." No one had ever said that to her before.
When the meeting ended, Illyra watched the humans leave. She expected relief to follow. Instead, she felt something heavier. Hope. It scared her. That night, alone in her quarters, she replayed the moment again and again. The hall, the silence, the way the galaxy had looked at her. Not with pity this time, but confusion. She wondered how long this alliance would last. She wondered how long until the humans realized what everyone else already believed, that choosing her had been a mistake. Far away, on their return ship, Monroe stared out into open space. One of his advisors approached quietly. "Sir," she said, "the backlash will be severe." "I know, and if we fail," Monroe exhaled slowly, "then we fail with our values intact." He thought of the princess's expression when she realized they were serious. "It's worth it," he added softly. The galaxy did not agree. But humanity had made its choice. And somewhere between the stars, a disabled alien princess began to believe, just a little, that being chosen might finally mean something. The alliance did not feel real at first. For Alira, the days after the convergence passed like a dream she was afraid to wake from. Messages arrived from Valari elders filled with disbelief and caution. Some were grateful, others were afraid. A few warned her gently not to trust the humans too much. "They will leave," one elder wrote. "They always do." Illyra understood why they believed that. History had taught them to expect abandonment, not loyalty. She herself had learned to prepare for disappointment long before she learned to hope. When the first human ships arrived in Valari space, the fear became louder. They did not arrive in a grand formation. There were no displays of power, no symbolic gestures meant to impress. Just a small fleet of transport vessels, research ships, and construction units moving carefully, almost respectfully, through the system. Humans requested permission before entering orbit. That alone unsettled many Valari officials. They asked where to dock instead of choosing for themselves. They asked which areas were culturally sensitive. They asked how much help was welcome, and how much was too much. No one was used to that. Illyra observed from her chamber as human engineers toured the capital city. They took notes, not just on buildings and systems, but on how people moved through spaces, where they struggled, where they rested, where assistance was quietly offered, or quietly avoided. They noticed things others never had: stairs without alternatives, public platforms designed only for the able-bodied, communication systems that assumed perfect sensory function. Instead of criticizing, they asked questions. Would ramps work here? What if this interface could be adjusted? Is this difficult for you, or just tiring? At first, the Valari answered politely but distantly. They had seen this before. Foreign interest that faded once it became inconvenient. But the humans kept coming back. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The humans did not push Valari society to change overnight. They started small. Portable support systems, adaptive technology that could be worn or removed without shame. Public spaces redesigned slowly, with input from those who used them. They never spoke of fixing anyone. They spoke of fitting the world better. Illyra worked closely with them, though she did not expect to.
At first, she assumed her role would be symbolic.
A gesture humanity would grow tired of once the novelty faded. But the humans insisted she be involved in every major decision. "If this affects your people," Ambassador Monroe told her during one long planning session, "it should include your voice." Sometimes she did not know what to say. Sometimes her ideas were uncertain, shaped by years of being ignored. The humans waited anyway. They listened when she spoke slowly. They adjusted schedules when she grew tired. They redesigned meeting spaces so she could participate fully without being reminded of her limitations. For the first time in her life, leadership did not hurt. The galaxy noticed, not loudly at first, just small comments in trade channels, quiet jokes among diplomats. Humanity is wasting resources. They are rebuilding a dying culture instead of advancing their own. They chose sentiment over survival. Humanity did not respond. They focused inward. They focused on learning. They studied Valari history, not just the parts that ended in failure, but the parts that showed resilience. Art forms created for those who could no longer sculpt physically. Story-weaving traditions, designed for minds that processed the world differently. Humans found value where others had stopped looking. Illyra watched them struggle, too. Human technology did not always integrate smoothly. Mistakes were made. Designs failed. Some projects took far longer than planned. Human bodies were fragile in Valari environments, and Valari physiology struggled with certain human systems. But instead of blaming each other, They adapted together. That, more than anything, changed how the Villari viewed them. One evening, years into the alliance, Elira sat with Monroe overlooking the city lights. The glow reflected softly against the support frame of her chair.
"They still think you made a mistake," she said quietly.
Monroe smiled. He looked older now, slower, but his eyes were calm. "They're allowed to," he replied. "Does it not bother you?" she asked. "Being underestimated?" He considered this. "Humans have been underestimated since we learned to stand upright," he said. "We're used to it." She watched the city below. New pathways lit gently, public spaces designed for all forms of movement. Villari citizens moved more freely than they had in generations.
"You could have chosen power," she said.
"We chose partnership," Monroe answered. "Power changes hands. Partnership changes people." The galaxy remained unimpressed. Trade advantages shifted elsewhere. Political influence bypassed humanity. Some alliances openly excluded them from negotiations, assuming they brought nothing of strategic value. Humanity adapted. They strengthened internal cooperation. They shared research freely with Villari scholars. Together, they developed systems focused on sustainability, long-term stability, and mutual care. It was slower than conquest. It was quieter than domination. But it lasted. Elira changed as well. She stopped apologizing for her pace. She stopped shrinking herself to make others comfortable. With human support, she explored leadership in ways her people had never allowed her to. She became known for patience, for deep analysis, for decisions that considered consequences beyond immediate gain. Other species dismissed her approach as inefficient. They did not see the results accumulating beneath the surface. Years later, when a major interstellar network began to fail, not through violence, but through complexity and neglect, many civilizations panicked. Systems built on speed and hierarchy collapsed under their own weight. Humanity and the Villari were ready. Their designs emphasized redundancy, accessibility, clear communication across differences. They had built systems assuming failure would happen, and prepared for it. When others asked how, humanity pointed quietly to their alliance. "We learned to plan for those who struggle," a human engineer said. "Turns out that helps everyone." Requests began arriving, carefully worded, slightly embarrassed. Could humanity advise? Could Villari consultants assist? Elira read every message. She remembered the silence in the convergence hall, the way no one had looked at her until humanity did. Now they were looking again, not with pity, with interest. She responded politely, without resentment.
"Of course," she wrote.
"We are happy to help." Late one night, alone, Ilra allowed herself a rare moment of honesty. She admitted to herself what she had not dared to say before.
The humans had not forgotten her. They had not moved on.
They were still choosing her, every day, in 100 quiet ways. And for the first time, she believed this alliance was not temporary. It was becoming something the galaxy had never planned for. Something built not on strength alone, but on the refusal to leave anyone behind. Time changed how the galaxy looked at Princess Elira, but it changed how she looked at herself even more. Years had passed since humanity first arrived in Villari space. What once felt like an experiment now felt like a rhythm. Ships came and went. Joint councils met regularly. Human and Villari voices blended into something new, not one replacing the other, but both learning to exist together. Elira no longer waited to be invited into conversations. She led them. Her body was still fragile. That had not changed. She still required support to move. Fatigue still came easily. Pain still visited without warning. But the humans had taught her something important, not through words, but through behavior. Limitations did not remove value. They shaped perspective. Illyra had learned to see patterns others missed, while stronger leaders rushed decisions. She paused. While louder voices dominated rooms, she listened. While empires measured success in expansion, she measured it in stability. And slowly, quietly, people began to notice. At first, it was Valari scholars who came to her. They brought old problems that had never been solved because they required patience more than power. Illyra worked through them carefully, asking human consultants when needed, always insisting on shared credit. Then humans from other sectors began to request her input: infrastructure planners, cultural mediators, ethical review boards. They trusted her judgment. The galaxy still saw her as disabled. Humanity saw her as precise. One meeting, years into her leadership role, changed everything. A neutral coalition invited representatives from several mid-level civilizations to discuss long-term resource sharing. Humanity was included only as an observer. The Valari were barely mentioned in the initial invitation. Illyra attended anyway. The room was filled with confident voices. Leaders spoke quickly, overlapping, pushing their ideas forward. Proposals were complex, ambitious, and fragile. Illyra listened. She noticed assumptions others missed, systems that required perfect cooperation, timelines that left no room for delay, designs that assumed all participants would always function at peak capacity. She waited. When she finally spoke, the room slowed. "What happens," she asked gently, "when one member cannot meet these demands?" Several leaders responded quickly. "Then they must be replaced, removed from the system, compensated for."
Irila nodded. "And if that member is you?" she asked.
Silence followed. She continued, voice calm. "We design systems based on our strongest moments, but history shows we live in our weakest ones." She proposed alternatives: redundant roles, shared responsibility, flexible timelines, support structures that activated automatically when someone fell behind. Some dismissed her ideas as inefficient. The human observer spoke next.
These systems already exist, he said. They work.
"We built them with the Valari."
Interest spread through the room like a quiet ripple.
The coalition asked for data. They asked for demonstrations. They asked for Illyra. That was when the galaxy began to see her not as a symbol, but as a strategist. Still, praise came slowly. Recognition always lagged behind results. Some leaders framed her success as a human achievement alone, ignoring her role. Others treated her as an exception, rather than evidence. Illyra did not argue. She had learned something from humanity as well. Validation was pleasant, but unnecessary. Results mattered more. Humanity continued its path, still underestimated. Their alliance networks grew not through dominance, but through reliability. When systems failed, humans responded. When negotiations stalled, humans mediated. When smaller civilizations were ignored, humans remembered them. This reputation spread quietly. Illyra watched it all with a mixture of pride and concern. One evening, she spoke privately with Monroe, now retired from formal diplomacy, but still deeply involved.
They are beginning to depend on you, she said. Monroe nodded.
Yes, that can become dangerous, she said. Dependence creates expectations.
He smiled slightly. "That's why we keep saying no sometimes?" Illyra raised an eyebrow. "You do?" "Of course," he replied. Helping doesn't mean surrendering boundaries. She considered this. Her entire life she had been either dismissed or overprotected. The idea of balanced trust was still new. Another message arrived that week. This one from a powerful trade consortium that had once mocked humanity's alliance choice. They requested Illyra's presence as an advisor. The tone was respectful, almost careful. she accepted. When she entered their chamber, the leaders stood. Not out of ceremony, but habit. They waited for her to settle comfortably before beginning. That small detail mattered. They asked about systems resilience, about inclusive design, about long-term cooperation without enforced hierarchy. They did not ask about her condition. They did not apologize for it either. After the meeting, alone again, Illyra allowed herself a quiet smile. This was what being chosen had become. Not protection. Not pity. Participation. Still, doubt lingered. Late at night, when pain kept her awake, old fears returned. She wondered if this respect would fade if humanity shifted priorities, if she would be remembered only as a phase in their growth. She voiced this fear once, during a quiet conversation with a young human engineer. "What if they move on?" she asked softly. "What if I am no longer useful?"
The engineer looked confused.
"That's not how usefulness works for us," she said. "People aren't tools." Illyra exhaled slowly.
"I am still learning that,"
she admitted. The engineer smiled.
"So are we." The galaxy faced another challenge soon after, not a crisis, but a choice. A proposal emerged to restructure interstellar governance.
Faster decisions, centralized authority, reduced consultation. It promised efficiency. It threatened diversity. Humanity opposed it politely, but firmly. The Valari, guided by Illyra, outlined risks others ignored. Smaller civilizations listened closely. The proposal stalled, not because it was defeated, but because too many asked better questions. Illyra realized then that influence did not always look like command. Sometimes it looked like hesitation, introduced at the right moment. Years ago, the galaxy had looked at her and seen weakness. Now they saw caution. And caution in a universe built too fast was revolutionary. On the anniversary of the Alliance, humanity held a small gathering. No broadcasts, no declarations, just shared stories. Illyra attended remotely, her image projected among human faces. Monroe raised a glass. "To the choice everyone warned us against," he said, "and the future it gave us." Laughter followed, warm, easy. Illyra felt something settle inside her. She had spent most of her life trying not to be a burden. Now, she understood. She had never been one. She had simply been ahead of her time. And humanity, in choosing her, had chosen a future the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The problem did not arrive with alarms. That was what made it dangerous. At first, it was only delays. Messages that took longer to reach their destinations. Trade confirmations that arrived incomplete. Research data that required multiple attempts to sync across systems.
Most civilizations blamed minor technical errors.
They patched locally and moved on. But Princess Illyra noticed a pattern. She always did. The failures were not random. They followed lines of complexity. The more layers a system had, the more likely it was to hesitate, to miscommunicate, to lose small but important details. Illyra requested a quiet review. Human analysts joined Valari scholars. They mapped interstellar communication networks, governance structures, and shared infrastructures. What they found made them uneasy. The galaxy had grown too fast. Systems had been built on top of systems, each assuming the ones below would never fail. Updates were rushed. Responsibilities overlapped without clarity. No one truly understood the whole anymore. It was not collapse, but it was exhaustion. Illyra presented her findings to a limited council. No dramatic language. No accusations.
"This is not a crisis," she said calmly. "Yet." That single word drew attention.
"If we continue like this," she continued, "small failures will accumulate. Trust will erode. Coordination will slow. And when we finally call it a crisis, it will be too complex to fix quickly." Some leaders listened, others dismissed it as cautious speculation, but humanity listened closely. They recognized the signs. Their own history was full of systems that worked, until they suddenly didn't, not because of malice, but because no one had planned for human limits. Together, humans and Valari prepared quietly. They did not issue warnings that would cause panic. They did not demand authority. They built alternatives, parallel networks, shared protocols, clear documentation written not for experts, but for anyone who might need to understand it under pressure.
They assumed people would get tired.
They assumed mistakes would happen. They assumed someone would be left behind, and they planned accordingly. When the wider failure came, it still surprised the galaxy. A major coordination hub began to stall, not shut down, just slow enough to cause confusion. Trade schedules drifted. Diplomatic meetings misaligned. Shared research stalled mid-transfer. Civilizations blamed each other. Some demanded control. Others withdrew to protect their own systems. The problem grew. Requests began arriving at human channels, not publicly at first. Quiet inquiries. Careful wording. Do you have insight into this delay? Have you experienced similar issues? Can you recommend temporary solutions? Humanity responded calmly.
Yes. They shared tools. Guides. Access to backup systems designed for clarity over speed.
They asked nothing in return. Word spread. Soon the requests were no longer quiet. A coalition meeting was called. Emergency language was avoided, but tension filled the space. Leaders spoke over one another, proposing quick fixes that conflicted with each other. Illyra attended. She did not rush to speak. She waited until the room tired itself. Then she said, "May I ask a question?" The noise faded.
"When was the last time," she asked, "we redesigned these systems for those who struggle the most to use them?" No one answered immediately. She continued, "We optimize for efficiency, assuming perfect conditions."
But perfection is rare. Fatigue is common. Confusion is common. Change is constant. She gestured gently. Our alliance prepared for this, not because we expected failure, but because we expected people. Humanity supported her words with evidence, data from years of slow, inclusive design, case studies showing how redundancy reduced stress, how accessibility improved response time, how shared understanding prevented escalation. The galaxy listened, not because humanity was powerful,
Not because Illyra was royal, but because nothing else was working.
Implementation began cautiously. Human Valeri frameworks were integrated into larger systems. Training sessions emphasized clarity, not authority. Smaller civilizations were included instead of bypassed. Progress was slow, but it was steady. Some leaders resented this approach. It felt like surrendering control.
Like admitting weakness. Illyra understood that fear.
She addressed it directly in a private council. Designing for weakness does not make you weak, she said.
It makes you durable. That phrase spread, much like Monroe's words years before. The crisis faded, not dramatically, but completely.
Systems stabilized. Communication cleared. Trust began to rebuild. And the galaxy noticed something unsettling. Humanity had been right. Again. Afterward, attention turned toward them in a way that made humans uncomfortable. Invitations multiplied. Advisory roles were offered. Some suggested formal leadership positions. Humanity declined most of them.
We don't want to run the galaxy.
We want it to keep running. That answer confused many. Illyra watched these developments with careful concern. Influence brought risk. Visibility attracted expectations. She met with human leadership in private. "You are becoming central," she said, "whether you want to or not." A younger representative sighed. We know. Do you regret the choice you made? She asked quietly.
There was no hesitation.
No, he said. We regret only that it took us so long to be taken seriously.
She smiled faintly. The galaxy began to revisit history. Analysts re-examined the convergence. Commentators discussed humanity's early decision. Some called it accidental genius. Others called it moral luck. Very few called it empathy. Illyra did not correct them. She had learned that lessons land best when discovered, not explained. One evening, alone in her chamber, she reflected on how far things had come. The girl who once waited quietly at the edge of galactic gatherings now advised entire networks. She was still disabled, she was still tired, but she was no longer invisible. A message arrived from a distant civilization, newly contacted, uncertain and afraid.
They asked a simple question. Who can we trust? Illyra forwarded it to the humans.
Their reply was just as simple. You can trust those who design space for you before you ask for it.
The message was shared.
It became guidance, not law, not command, an example. And that was humanity's greatest strength. They did not force the galaxy to change. They showed it how. As systems stabilized and panic faded, a quiet truth settled across the stars. The future had not been saved by power. It had been steadied by patience. And at the center of it all sat a disabled alien princess, once dismissed, once overlooked, whose perspective had shaped the galaxy too fast to notice its own limits. The galaxy did not fully understand her yet, but it was finally learning to listen. The galaxy had a long memory, but it was not always an honest one. Stories changed as they were told. Details blurred. Motives were rewritten to fit new beliefs. What once seemed foolish was later called bold. What was once mocked became inevitable in hindsight. Princess Illyra knew this well. She sat now in a chamber far smaller than the convergence hall had been long ago. This room was designed for conversation, not spectacle. The table was round. The lighting was soft. Every seat was accessible in more than one way. It had been designed by humans. Around her were representatives from dozens of civilizations, including some that had once dismissed her without a glance. They were here for a simple reason. They wanted to understand. The galaxy stood at a turning point. Systems were stable. Cooperation was improving. Smaller civilizations had voices again. But something deeper had shifted as well. People were asking why. Why had humanity succeeded where stronger powers had failed? Why had a disabled alien princess become one of the most trusted minds in interstellar planning? Why did the old rules no longer feel sufficient? The session began quietly. A representative spoke first. Princess Illyra, they said carefully, do you remember the convergence? She did. She remembered the vast hall, the silence, the way her hands had trembled, the way humanity's choice had felt like a mistake even as it felt like hope. Yes, she replied. I remember. Another voice followed. Did you believe them? She paused. No, she said honestly. Not at first. There was no shame in the answer. A human representative smiled softly. Neither did we, he said. Light laughter moved through the room.
Illyra continued.
I believed they would leave. I believed they would realize the cost and decide it was too high. And when they didn't, someone asked.
Then I had to decide something myself, she said. Whether I would continue to see myself the way the galaxy always had. The room was silent again. But this time it was different. It was listening silence. I was disabled long before my body failed me, Illyra said gently.
I was disabled by expectation, by the belief that value must look a certain way. She looked around the table. Humanity never argued with that belief. They simply behaved as if it were untrue. That behavior had changed everything. After the session, Illyra retreated to her private space. Age had slowed her further. Her body required more care now. Pain visited more often, and rest came less easily. But her mind was clear. A message waited for her. A personal one. Human origin. It was from Ambassador Monroe's granddaughter. Monroe himself had passed quietly years earlier, surrounded by people he loved. He had never sought statues or honors. Humanity had respected that. The message was simple. He used to talk about you. It read. He said, choosing you was the easiest hard decision he ever made. Illyra closed her eyes. She remembered Monroe's calm voice, his patience, the way he had sat, instead of standing, so she would not have to look up. She wondered if he had ever doubted. She suspected he had. The galaxy continued to change, slowly and unevenly. There were still disagreements, still failures, still moments when old instincts returned. But something essential had shifted. When new systems were designed, someone always asked, who might struggle with this? When alliances were formed, someone asked, who is being left out? When leadership was chosen, someone asked, who listens best? These questions did not guarantee good outcomes, but they made bad ones harder. Humanity remained strange to the galaxy. Still not the strongest. Still not the fastest. Still uncomfortable with praise. They declined offers of dominance again and again. Why? One leader finally asked openly. A human diplomat answered, because control is easy. Responsibility is harder. The galaxy did not fully understand that answer, but it respected it. Illyra's health declined gradually. There was no sudden crisis, no dramatic farewell. She simply began to step back, inviting others to take on roles she had once filled. She mentored quietly, asked questions instead of giving orders, trusted people to grow. When she announced her formal retirement from interstellar advisory roles, the response surprised even her. Messages arrived from across the stars, not official statements, but personal ones. You taught us to slow down. You made space for us. You remembered us. Humanity sent no grand tribute. They did something else instead. They redesigned the Advisory Council's charter. It required that leadership structures always include those most affected by decisions, that accessibility be considered a baseline, not an exception, that no system be approved without testing under imperfect conditions. They named nothing after her. They simply made her values permanent. On her final public appearance, Illyra addressed a small gathering. Humans, Velari, and others sat together, not separated by status. She spoke simply. The question that began all of this, she said, was whether humanity remembered me. She paused, breathing carefully. The truth is, I never needed to ask. They showed me every day. She looked toward the human delegation. And I want to answer the question that history will ask. She smiled. Yes, I remember them too. The galaxy would later debate what humanity's greatest achievement had been. Some argued it was system resilience. Others pointed to ethical frameworks. A few claimed it was strategic patience. But those who had lived through it knew better. Humanity's greatest achievement was choosing someone the galaxy had already given up on, and then never pretending that choice was temporary.
Long after Princess Illyra's voice fell silent among the stars, her influence remained.
Not as legend, not as myth, but as design. And, somewhere, on a quiet world still learning how to belong among the stars, humans continued to do what they had always done best. They remembered. They stayed. And in doing so, they proved that the strongest force in the galaxy was not power, speed, or perfection. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to abandon someone once chosen.